So this is from last year's. This is Triangulation Extinction. There is a illustration. I guess I'll show that at the end though, because it might be a little spoilery. So this one is, so the theme this year was extinction, and I decided I wanted to write a fantasy extinction story instead of a science fiction extinction story. And then I went hiking and just kind of thought about it while I was hiking. And the story pretty much came fully formed into my head. And I tried not to mess it up as I was writing it down after I got back from my hike. So this is The Fire of Countless Stars by me, Jamie Lackey. The dragons died when the emperor took all of the magic into himself and became God Emperor. Most people, only familiar with dragons as vague threats to their livestock, saw this as a bonus and declared a holiday in the God Emperor's honor. Willow's family harvested dragon dung for their livelihood and lived close enough to the dragon breeding grounds to see their aerial dances and hear their songs. They did not celebrate. Willow wept for days. The God Emperor declared that he would distribute the magic fairly. He sent a magical toy to each child under the age of 17 in the Empire as a proof of his generosity. Willow, the youngest in her family by a year, was the only one to receive a toy, a top that played a sweet, cheerful tune and spun without stopping. She had never owned anything magical before. Her parents marveled over it and begged her to be careful with her treasure. She tucked it into a drawer between worn socks that needed mending. Time passed, and her family ventured deeper and deeper into the dragon nests, harvesting bone and hide in addition to dung, until Willow found the very heart of their lair, where the Dragon Queen had stood guard over her last clutch of eggs. Nothing remained of the Dragon King but her huge skull. She had been more magic than anything else, but the unguarded eggs huddled safely together. There were 6 of them, each about the size of both of Willow's fists together. The eggshells were smooth and cool, no more alive than any other rocks. They would surely be worth something to some collector in a city far away. Willow hid them in her sock drawer with the God Emperor's toy. Willow helped her mother pack the last of the dishes into the wagon, then hugged her tight. "I still think you should come to the city with us," her mother said. "It's not safe out here for a girl alone." "We can't just abandon the holding," Willow said. They'd had this conversation 100 times. She wasn't leaving. This was her home, and she would support herself here. "Life is easier in the towns now," her mother said. "The God Emperor blessed the fountains, so the water always runs clean and sweet." "Our well is clean enough," Willow said. "I'll be fine. I promise." Her father hugged her, and her older brother tugged on her braid. "You can come to us any time," her father said. "We'll always have a place for you." Willow nodded, grateful for their concern. But her place was here. She watched the wagon till it vanished around a turn in the mountain, and then got back to work. 2 weeks later, she found a pregnant griffin on the slopes above her house. Its feathers were brittle and its fur falling out in clumps. Every breath was slow and ragged, and it just glared at her with its eagle eyes as she dragged it into the barn. Willow wondered how it had managed to survive so long without any magic. She hiked up to the lake just up the mountain and caught a few fish. She slipped each one into the griffin's beak and helped it tilt its head back to swallow. Time passed, and her menagerie grew. She didn't know why the magical creatures were drawn to her, but she managed to keep most of them alive. None of them ever recovered enough to leave. They didn't really belong out in the God Emperor's world. He would never give any of his precious magic to save a handful of monsters. Willow spent sleepless nights nursing baby griffins and turning phoenix eggs in banked embers and chasing foxes out of the cockatrice coop. Then, one moonless winter night, when the stars sparkled off a freshly blanket. I'll start that one over. Then, one moonless winter night, when the stars sparkled off a blanket of freshly fallen snow, the unicorn came. It trudged up the mountain road, one faltering footstep in front of the next. Its head dipped beneath the weight of its spiraled horn, and snow clung to its silky tail and mane. "Hello, Willow," it said, its voice like the sound of wind through spring flowers. Willow led it to the barn and gave it her best quilt. "I am dying," the unicorn said, "but I must not. If I die, all things die. It is your destiny to help me." "Me? How can I help?" The unicorn's eyes slipped closed and its breathing slowed. Willow didn't have time to panic. She ran. She grabbed her entire sock drawer and clutched it to her chest as she sprinted back. She pulled out the top, the only magic that she'd ever possessed, and broke it against the unicorn's horn. She felt more than saw something spark out of the toy and into the unicorn. The unicorn looked up at her, its eyes the color of the mountain sky at midnight and containing just as many stars. "I will sleep," it said. "I must save all of the energy that I can." "Why come to me?" Willow asked, shaking and blinking away tears. "Why not go to the God Emperor? He would give you magic." "The magic is not his," the unicorn said. "I will not take his stolen gifts. Will not be his prize to display, his pet to beg for scraps. I would rather die." "And let all things die with you?" The unicorn's eyes burned with the fire of countless stars. "Yes." The unicorn slept, and Willow considered how to get more magic to keep it alive. The God Emperor hadn't given away any more toys since his ascension, but she'd learned that he was generous to his favorites and giving magical trinkets to anyone who pleased him. If she could steal a few, that would at least buy her some time. She fed all of her creatures and hiked to the next holding over. Most of them had moved to town, but Bryce, who was a few years younger than Willow, had stayed on with old Hannah, his grandmother, who refused to be parted from her herd. They kept goats and sold milk and cheese and meat. Willow arrived just as the sun crested the mountain. She'd intended to tell them that she was going briefly to town and to ask them to check on her holding while she was away. But the whole story spilled out of her the instant she saw a friendly face. The fate of the world was too much to carry alone. They listened and fed her porridge with honey and goat's milk, and Bryce brought his toy from the God Emperor, a silvery ball that looped around and returned to whoever threw it. "Take this," he said, pressing it into her hand. "It's not much, but I want the unicorn to have it." "Thank you," Willow said. The magic sparked inside it, like tiny bubbles popping. "I'll send my Bryce to look in on your beasts while you're gone," Hannah said. "The walk is too much for my old bones, else I'd head over myself. I've always wanted to see the unicorn." "I miss the dragons," Willow said. She'd never admitted that to anyone before, never dared to voice what amounted to a criticism of the God Emperor. Hannah took her hands and began to hum the first bars in the dragon's mating song. After a few beats, Willow and Bryce joined in. It was a poor rendition. It was not a song made for human throats. But when they were done, tears stained all three of their faces. "Thank you," Willow said. She kissed Hannah's wrinkled cheek. "I'll be back as soon as I can." Willow took easily to thievery. She was strong and nimble and found scaling walls of the great manors no more difficult than climbing a tree to rescue a stuck chimera cub. She broke a box that closed itself, a pen that never needed ink, and Bryce's silver ball on the unicorn's horn. It cracked one eye open and looked up at her. "Thank you, Willow." "How can I help you?" she asked. "What must I do?" "I only knew that I must come here and that you would help. I could see no more after that. I put my faith in you to do what must be done." Willow wanted to shout at it, to demand to know what made her special, why she was the one set to this impossible task. Instead, she pressed her face to the unicorn's silky mane. It smelled, ever so faintly, of lilacs and rainwater. Bryce had left some fresh rolls and butter under a cloth on the kitchen table. She ate them, then set off to steal more magic. She had thieved her way through all of the nearby towns, pocketing a cup that was always full of wine, a forever blooming rose, and a handful of neglected toys. She was approaching the city where her family had settled when she heard the story of the teleport bracelet. The God Emperor was so fond of the local lord that he gave him a bracelet that allowed him to teleport anywhere that he wished so that he could visit the Emperor in his palace more easily. With that, Willow could steal from anyone and be home in time to feed the cockatrices. But this was no country lord, sleeping unguarded with his windows open. Willow had hoped to sneak into the city, score a few more trinkets, then get back home. She hadn't intended to visit her family. She wanted them to have no part in her crimes or her responsibilities. But now that she knew of the teleport bracelet, she couldn't leave without it. She needed to stay and make a plan. She knocked on the door at the address that her mother had provided. It was a large building with 3 stories of narrow windows stretching over her head. A child emerged from the door, clad in a dress that had once been a sack, and glaring. "Who are you, then?" she asked. "I'm looking for my family. I believe that they're living here." "Lots of people live here. They got names?" "Willow," a familiar voice called from behind her. She turned to see her brother, looking thin and worn and covered in fine gray dust. "What are you doing here?" he asked. The child sniffed and vanished back inside. "You didn't give that brat any money, did you?" her brother asked. Willow shook her head. "You're not here to stay, are you? I thought things were going well at the holding." "Things are fine. I just came to visit," Willow said. "I suppose I should have written ahead." Her brother shrugged. "We'll make it work. Come on inside. Mother should just be starting dinner." The hallways were stuffy and dark, but the apartment that her family was renting had the windows thrown open and the familiar clutter made it feel more like home. Her mother also looked thin, but she smiled and wrapped Willow in a tight hug. Willow wished she'd brought some food, or that she'd thought to pocket some coin when she was stealing magical trinkets. "It's so good to see you," her mother said, stepping back to examine her. "You look so healthy. I miss all of the fresh air on the mountains. But things are going well here. Your father and brother both have jobs in the factory." "It's not bad work," her brother added. "Easier than shoveling dragon dung." Her father arrived a few minutes later, and they all sat down for dinner together. Willow asked general questions about city life and eventually managed to learn a few things about the nobles in the city. The lord that she was after owned the factory where her father and brother worked. He apparently kept his teleport bracelet on at all times, so he would be wearing it in his factory office. Willow asked for a tour, and her brother cheerfully offered to see what he could do. The factory was hot and smoky, but everyone there seemed grateful for their jobs. "The God Emperor helped design this place himself," her brother said. "There's magic woven into every step of the process, and the metal we forge here is sold all over the world." The God Emperor could have made the whole process without any labor from humans, but he wanted to make sure that the people would be able to find jobs, her father added. Her brother nodded. "Things were harder before the factory opened, but now there's enough work for everyone." "That's great," Willow said. She wondered what the city had been like before, when the magic was free, but she knew it would be foolish to ask. Instead, she pointed to a door high above the factory floor, where the air was clearer. "Is that the Lord's office?" "Yep," her brother said. "He oversees the whole facility from up there." Willow could see 3 fairly easy ways into the office. Now she just had to get up there and jump the Lord when he entered. She'd never stolen something from someone's wrist before, but how hard could it be? She slipped out of her family's apartment, leaving a note saying that she wanted to watch the sunrise and would be back soon. She climbed into the office before anyone was working, and she'd climb into the office before anyone was working and wait till the Lord arrived. But instead of finding the factory dark and abandoned, she found it bustling. And when she climbed into the office window after dodging a handful of sleepy workers, she found the Lord bent over his desk. He was older than she'd imagined, gray-haired and balding, with a close-cropped beard and beaky nose. "Who are you?" the Lord demanded. What are you doing here?" "I'm here for your bracelet." The Lord laughed in her face. "This bracelet." He held up his wrist, displaying a strand of blue-green beads tied securely in place. "It is mine, gifted to me by the God Emperor himself. You can't have it." His gaze drifted down her body. But if you don't make me angry, I will let you walk out of here instead of calling the guards. Willow's hands curled into fists and her cheeks burned. You're a feisty one, aren't you? I like that. He grabbed her wrist, his grip hard and bruising, and the world melted around them. An instant later, they were in a bedchamber. The Lord shoved her toward the bed. Willow drove her knee into his groin and grabbed for the bracelet. The Lord shrieked with pain. The world blurred around them again, and they were in a guard station. Seize this bitch, the Lord screamed. But Willow wrapped her hands around the bracelet and imagined the coldest, highest mountain peak she had ever ventured to. The drop in temperature was so sudden that it hurt. The wind howled and snow swirled in stinging gusts. She pulled as hard as she could, and the bracelet came free in her hand. She twisted her other wrist out of the Lord's grasp, and before he could move, she was back home, shuddering from the cold in the safety of her kitchen. He'd freeze to death up there. But she couldn't go back, couldn't save him. It was too dangerous. She fell to her knees and buried her face in her cold hands. Then, when she was warm again, she teleported back to the city and had breakfast with her family. How was the sunrise? Her mother asked. Willow forced her face into some semblance of a smile and sipped her tea. It was lovely. The freedom that the teleport bracelet gave her was an unexpected joy. She could think of a picture from a book, and suddenly she was deep in the jungle, or standing at the top of a mountain, or ankle deep in the ocean. And moments later, she could be home. She stole trinkets for the unicorn from around the world, and she listened to the stories people told, trying to figure out what she needed to do next. She stroked the unicorn's silky neck while it slept and tried not to think about the coldest, highest mountain peak that she'd ever ventured to. There was a woman deep in the forest to the south who was attempting to breed a flower that would create new magic. People whispered that would give off magic the way other flowers give off scent. Willow had to walk for 2 days before she found the garden, following complicated directions that she'd worked for months to earn. It was a beautiful place, with brilliant flowers crowded into every corner. The air was flower sweet and filled with the sound of buzzing bees. So you're the unicorn girl, the gardener said, wiping her hands on her heavy apron. My name is Willow. A pretty enough name, she said. So you want one of my seeds? They don't work, you know. They'll never work. They need magic to sprout. A lot of magic. Only the God Emperor could make them grow. But once they're growing, they'll create new magic? The gardener shrugged. In theory. There's no way to really know. Not for sure. The unicorn came to me and told me that I'd save her. She didn't say how. I don't know if I'm on the right path, if I'm doing the right things. All I can do is what I can. I heard about your seeds, so I came. If you let me, I'll plant them everywhere I go. Maybe one will sprout. They won't. They'll rot in the ground. Willow trailed one hand on the smooth green leaves of an unfamiliar fern. You'd know better than I, but I still want to try. The gardener nodded, just once. That's why I make them, even though it's hopeless, just to try. She pulled a handful of seeds out of her apron pocket and carefully tipped them into Willow's hands. Willow examined the seeds in her cupped palms. They are beautiful, but dry and brittle, hollow inside, where magic should spark. She closed her fingers around them. She'd plant them, and if they rotted in the ground, she'd plant more. Then, one day, instead of appearing in her intended destination, she found herself in a courtyard, face to face with the God Emperor. This has gone on long enough, don't you think? He said. He was only slightly taller than Willow, and his smile was soft and kind. His dark hair curled around his face, and his eyes and skin practically glowed. He was beautiful in a way that was impossible without magic, in a serene, untouchable beauty, like the unicorns. Terror clawed at Willow's belly like a living, separate creature, like a griffin, no longer able to fly and incapable of understanding why. The thought, that thought spread through her veins like ice, freezing the terror and transforming it into something else, something hard and angry, like the unicorn's eyes filled with the fire of countless stars. You should give back the magic then, Willow said. It's not yours. The God Emperor laughed, but it was a warm, kind laugh, like they were sharing a joke. You were a child when I claimed the magic. You don't really remember what it was like before. The magic was never free. It was always controlled by some and coveted by many. At least in my hands, I can make sure it's fair. Everyone has access to at least a little magic. Clean water, good jobs, safety. Everyone has those things now. That wasn't always true. But you give more to others. Some people deserve more than others, Willow. You're not a child anymore. You must understand that. I've been watching you for a long time, you know. I can see that you're special. And what makes you worthy to decide who is special and who is deserving and who isn't? The God Emperor kept his smile, but it seemed a little sharper now. Do you think you could do better? She didn't. She didn't think anyone could. It wasn't that the God Emperor was cruel or evil. He'd seen unfairness in the world and wanted to fix it. But the unfairness was part of the world. It couldn't be removed, only shifted. The God Emperor took his silence as agreement, or as a challenge. Fine, he said. Here, give it a try. He reached out and touched her cheek, and power flooded into her. It was too much. It burned. I trained for decades to be a vessel, the God Emperor said, his tone light and conversational. But no one remembers that. No one thinks about the work I put in. I earned my power. No one else could contain it. That isn't even close to all of it, but it will kill you in a matter of moments. And then I will take it back. Willow closed her eyes and fled. She used the bracelet to flit from one place to another, magic leaking out of her like sparks exploding out of a fire. Finally, she collapsed at the unicorn's side. The gardener seeds that she'd planted here sprouted, vines spreading along the barn walls and flowers unfurling in an instant. They glowed with their own light, soft and steady and sure. The dragon eggs, still clustered in her long abandoned sock drawer, hatched. She buried her fingers in the unicorn's mane. The magic drained from her like water falling into a bottomless pit. The unicorn stood, pulling away from Willow's numb fingers. You've achieved your destiny, it said. Then it leaned down and pressed its smooth cheek against Willow's. Thank you. Then it was gone. When Willow woke, she was covered with baby dragons, and Bryce was holding her hand. You brought the dragons back, he said, his voice choked with tears. I forgot how beautiful they were. She expected the God Emperor to come for him, and eventually he did. I would have given power to the unicorn, he said. It needed only ask. Would you have sprouted the seeds I planted? Willow asked. The God Emperor smiled. Of course. But Willow didn't believe him. There was magic that was outside of his control now, magic for people who he didn't think deserved it. The people won't thank you for bringing the dragons back, the God Emperor said, or any of your other monsters. The world was safer without them. Willow shrugged. Safety isn't everything. The God Emperor sighed. I hope you don't come to regret those words. Is that a threat? The God Emperor laughed. So prickly, Willow. Your name should be Rose. Come back to the palace with me. I will protect you. This is my home, and I will support myself here. I could take you, if I wanted. The God Emperor leaned in and touched her cheek, his touch feather light. You mustn't forget which one of us has the power. The unicorn appeared between one heartbeat and the next. It said nothing, but pointed its horn straight at the God Emperor's heart. He pulled his hand back from her cheek as if it had burned him, and the unicorn vanished again. He gave a shaky laugh and departed. Willow did not see him again, but she did hear stories about how the God Emperor had restored the unicorn with a gift of magic from his own hand. The people saw the return of the dragons as a small price to pay and declared a holiday in his honor. Willow pulled on her heaviest coat and teleported to the coldest, highest mountain peak she'd ever ventured to. There was no sign of the Lord's body, but she knew it was there, buried beneath the untouched snow. The unicorn appeared beside her, and they watched the sunrise together. The cold air smelled like lilacs and rainwater, and tiny, star-bright flowers sprouted where the willow's tears fell. It was the most beautiful sunrise that Willow had ever seen.